You can't spell Intellivision without INTV. You also can't spell intervention without INTV. Yes, it's my desperate cry for help on NES Works Gaiden episode 73.
That's right. Ice, man. I am dangerous.
Among the first wave of INTV releases for Intellivision, we have Championship Tennis. This comes to us not from the smoking rubble of Mattel Electronics, but rather from the company's European affiliate, Nice Ideas, or Nice Ideas. Now, I know it says Nice Ideas, but the studio in question was based in Nice, France. So we'll go with Nice Ideas. Honestly, that sounds better than any of the uncle ideas that people like me come up with. According to Game Developers Research Institute, Mattel Electronics established Nice Ideas to be the company's envoy to Europe, developing exclusive games that would appeal to continental tastes, thus giving Mattel's console a foothold across the Atlantic. When Mattel killed Mattel Electronics in 1984, however, France's excellent labor laws prevented Nice Ideas from suffering the axe without considerable effort on Mattel's part. So, Nice Ideas remained intact for a while longer, and managed to produce this tennis simulation for Intellivision, along with World Cup Soccer and a handful of other games for other systems. These two Intellivision games shipped in 1985 for European fans courtesy of publisher-distributor Dextel, the only two Intellivision games released anywhere on Earth between Mattel Electronics' demise, but before its American relaunch. Sniffing around for software that it could bring quickly and cheaply to market for its new Intellivision retail push, they found two Nice Ideas carts just sitting there, waiting to be localized. Actually, I'm not really sure how much localization was really involved in a game like this, since the ROM contains about 10 words total. The French are usually pretty particular about locally published media being presented with a French language option, but the only online footage I can find of what appears to be the Dextel release still contains English text. And I can't tell if any adjustments were made to code to convert the game from the PAL-C-CAM output that would have been the French default to the NTSC format used in the US, or if that was simply handled by hardware. I can confidently say, however, that Championship Tennis attempts to bring an updated form of the sport to Intellivision. Unlike the Pong-style setup of 1980s tennis cartridge, Championship Tennis makes use of a behind-the-court perspective that presents the court with a vanishing point view seen in games like Champion Tennis for SG-1000 and Tennis for NES. Admittedly, I can't really say that Championship Tennis punches in that same weight class. This probably isn't news to anyone, but I'm finding this foray into the world of Intellivision to be rough going because of the system's awkward controller, and that thing absolutely affects the playability of a fast action game like this. Let's be honest, no one likes the Intellivision controller. If they tell you otherwise, they're lying to you as some sort of weird psyop. Now, back in the day, Mattel wanted to differentiate its console from the Atari 2600, and the two systems' controllers certainly set them apart from one another. The 2600 came with a one-button joystick. The Intellivision shipped with a convoluted thing that replaced the stick with a disc, flanked the controller body with 4 different buttons, and also included a 12-button telephone-style keypad that could be fitted with overlays to indicate the function of each button. Championship Tennis thankfully doesn't make much use of the keypad, but it still puts all 4 action buttons to use. There's simply no way to comfortably hold the controller and still have quick access to all 4 buttons. And as you can see here, the Intellivision controller's features led developers to overly complicate their game designs. In this case, you don't simply toss and hit the ball to serve, you have to tap one of 3 keypad buttons to determine the focus of your serve, then select your serve strength based on the specific action button you tap twice after making that selection. I think there's an interesting discussion to be had about how Intellivision attempted to bring the depth of a computer simulation to television consoles. Heck, according to Blue Sky Rangers, Championship Tennis was meant to make use of Intellivision's computer-style ECS add-on in order to incorporate 4-person doubles play, a feature that only appears here vestigially by allowing 2 people to play with or against CPU opponents. But in terms of features, Championship Tennis honestly blows away the console competition available in 1986, which is to say NES Tennis and Sega Super Tennis. In terms of accessibility and friction-free design, though, Nintendo comes out way on top. And visually, Championship Tennis doesn't even begin to enter the conversation. It's a clumsy and primitive-looking tennis game if you approach it as an arcade-style experience, something that the new wave of incoming systems would only serve to reinforce as a console's raison d'etre, as the NES Ideas team would say. Taken as more of a simulation, though, it is pretty impressive. With multiple difficulty options, greater hooks for 2 players than in the competition, several different venues with different surfaces that affect gameplay, and a host of options for serving and returning the ball, Championship Tennis has depth to spare. Is this what consumers necessarily wanted in 1986, though? It's hard to say, but I do respect INTV for making the effort, even if I am absolutely terrible at the game. Championship Tennis shipped alongside another game sharing its same secret origin, World Cup Soccer. Another game by NES Ideas, originally released as World Cup Football in Europe by Dextel. Localization! World Cup Soccer has a lot in common with the 2 INTV games we've already explored, and not just because it's a sports title. Specifically, it's a sports title built on salvaged code from an earlier release. Before it was World Cup Soccer, this cartridge was intended to ship as Super Soccer, an advanced version of the original NASL Soccer cartridge from way back in 1980. Since I don't have access to that older cartridge, I can't really speak to the improvements that this revision brought to the table. Super Soccer marketing material promised support for 4 players through the ECS expansion, though that doesn't seem to have made its way into World Cup Soccer. So I guess the improvements boil down to a more advanced feature set and, from what I can tell, the ability to face off against a CPU-powered opponent instead of just another human. But none of that changes the fact that World Cup Soccer amounts to a sports game from 1980, being sold as a new release in 1986. It even carries over some of the quirks of the original NASL Soccer, like the fact that your active player won't stop at the screen boundaries and simply warps around back to the other side of the field if he runs off screen, like Pac-Man. World Cup Soccer does differ from World Championship Baseball and Championship Tennis in one significant way, though. Where those games employed the Intellivision gamepad in a way that felt incredibly fussy and overly complicated, World Cup Soccer maybe doesn't do enough with the keypad. I really feel like the programmers had an opportunity to give you granular control of your team with the numpad here, but that's not the case. The controller's side buttons allow you to kick the ball high or low, and you can move one active fielder and guide the direction of a kick with the control disc, but that's about as specific as it gets. You can swap between active players, but this function is not explained in the manual and doesn't seem to work consistently. Different buttons will cause different fielders to become active, but only sometimes. It all feels very arbitrary and unpredictable as to which buttons will register and which fielder becomes active. Honestly, there's almost no point to controlling your little guy anyway. The entire game just kind of runs in auto mode, and I found that my active player's movements and involvement did very little to affect the action. Again, I have a hard time saying who would have been drawn to these games in 1986. They're very, very similar to Intellivision's existing sports titles, which could surely still be found either in active retail circulation through discount bins or at pawn shops and garage sales. Except this time around, these carts lack the official league licenses of the old carts to catch shoppers' attention. And due to their underlying age, they don't stand up very well to the vibrant, fast-paced, highly intuitive sports titles on the new Japanese consoles. I can understand their existence just to renew the Intellivision's presence in the market with quote-unquote new games. But the Intellivision desperately needed, actual new games if INTV wanted to be a serious business. Well, it's a good thing that INTV also shipped the RPG-adjacent Thunder Castle in its initial wave of cartridge releases. Thunder Castle embodies INTV's strategy for its latter-day software lineup. That is, find some existing assets, slap them together, get them out the door for cheap. But at the same time, it's actually new, different, and pretty fun. Now yes, despite being an INTV Corp release from 1985 or 86, the title screen to Thunder Castle still includes a copyright notice for Mattel 1982. That information is not correct, but here we are anyway. This simply speaks to the origins of the game, not only to the drawn-out history of this cartridge, but also to its underlying strength. Having been developed in the depths of Mattel Electronics before the death of Mattel Electronics, Thunder Castle is the brainchild of 2 of the original Blue Sky Rangers, Connie Goldman and Dave Warhol. Both Goldman and Warhol have a list of credits on video games spanning nearly 4 decades each. They're genuine lifers. And you can see their passion and talent on display here with an engaging, arcade-style maze action game boasting some genuinely gorgeous art and animation for a console of this vintage. If I were so starved of imagination that I could only describe video games in terms of other video games, I'd say that Thunder Castle feels like a midpoint between Atari's Adventure and Pac-Man, or, say, Tutankhamun and Gauntlet. Thankfully, I'm not that feeble-minded from old age just yet, so I'll skip the lazy comparisons and describe the action in concrete, grown-up terms. Thunder Castle gives you control of a knight who seeks to vanquish bad guys across 3 different mazes. It's a much simpler, more straightforward game experience than the sports titles. INTV didn't produce a keypad overlay for Thunder Castle since you only need to use the control disc and a single button to play. The knight you control has to kill dragons, wizards, and demons, and the sword he totes around seems deeply inadequate to the task. The knight runs around helplessly and will die instantly if a monster taps him, unless he happens to have just made contact with a smaller maze denizen that will power him up to become instantly fatal to the bad guys instead. Like I said, a little bit Pac-Man, a little bit adventure. I guess I'm not being feeble-minded if I'm just stating the obvious here. As in Pac-Man, it's a passive maze chase until you collect the power-ups that turn the tables. And like in Adventure, you have to run around through castles and forests, avoiding dragons while collecting treasures like crowns, gold bars, and grails. But you would be wrong to assume that this is some half-hearted clone of those games. For starters, you do not run around in a static maze as in other games. The 3 stages of Thunder Castle represent a progression. The forest where the castle sits, the interior of the castle yard, and eventually the dungeon. But their layouts appear to be variable. And by variable I mean that you can contend with different designs, but also that each design constantly warps to create and seal off passages. Running through a maze presents a real challenge when half of the intersections open or close every 10 seconds, meaning that you can carelessly run from a dragon into a freshly formed dead end, or find yourself pincered by wizards when a path opens up to allow them to flank you. However, you do have a small advantage in that the treasures you collect do more than simply add points to your tally. Each of the items littering the maze has a special power-up property, and you can activate the ability of the most recent icon you collected once by tapping an action button. These can be super helpful. A key allows you to pass through a wall once, giving you a quick escape from a pursuer, or simply allowing you to cut off a fleeing monster while you're energized to kill. The Grail allows you to become instantly energized without the need to collect a bat or mouse to power up, which allows you to turn the tables if the monsters are about to chow down on your knight. Though you can also use the ring to simply warp to a new spot in the maze if you're caught in a tight pinch. And so on. It's not necessarily easy to collect these tokens, since they appear in random spots for only a few seconds at a time, and you have to navigate to them through transforming passages while avoiding monsters. Thunder Castle is a really tough game, in fact. The forest stage is pretty easy as such things go, because you need to kill 3 dragons in succession before moving ahead. They're elusive and aggressive, depending on who holds the instant kill advantage at any given moment, but you can take them out with patience and a little cunning. The game veers into wildly difficult in Stage 2 though. Here you have to navigate the castle yard to kill 6 wizards, which appear 2 at a time, and your primary means of powering up for the kill, a little mouse who lives in the maze, actively runs away from you, versus the way the bats at the first stage hover around. As for the 3rd level, I can't actually speak to it from personal experience because level 2 is just that rough, with the wizards relentlessly boxing you in and blocking your way to the power-ups. However, the manual says you have to kill 9 demons, which appear 3 at a time, and I can assume that the power-up icon is even more vexing to collect. This frightful difficulty level notwithstanding though, Thunder Castle is a pretty appealing game. The lively title screens, boasting a new illustration for each stage, look great, and the maze warp and enemy death animations look impressively fluid. It even has pretty good music. It's all adapted from classical tunes, like Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, sure, but the title screen's tune selection, Henry Purcell's Abdelaziz Rondo, would also be borrowed by Tengen for Gauntlet's NES title screen a few years later. And honestly, most of the games available for the new competing systems around this time, NES, 7800, and eventually Master System, belong to the same straightforward action arcade family as Thunder Castle. That would begin to change before too long, but I'd say that Thunder Castle acquitted itself pretty well at the time it made its debut. Maybe not enough to make the INTV-era Intellivision a long-term contender, but certainly enough to give the system's fans something meaty to sink their teeth into. Still, when next we return to Intellivision, it's going to be more or less more of the same. I mean, what did you really expect? There's a reason that this console didn't revolutionize video gaming in the late 80s.